Hey there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. This is the final video in our Wix Tables series, and we're going to be talking about a really hot topic today, which is how to populate a Wix table using third-party data. For example, what you see here, I have a Google Sheet. I could also have an Airtable. I could have any other data that I'm getting from a third-party API, and how to display that data in a Wix table on your Wix website. If you haven't checked out the previous videos in this series, I do recommend doing that as we will be building on those foundations in this tutorial. But if you want to just jump in with me and check it out, then let's get started. So since this is kind of the culmination of our Wix Tables series, I'm really going to take it from the top here and cover everything from start to finish in terms of populating a table with third-party data. Let me talk a bit about what I do have set up here in advance and what we're going to be doing. So you can see here I already have a table element on my Wix site. And in terms of backend, what I've already set up is I've set up the Google Sheets integration, the Velo integration for Google Sheets. So I've installed the package and I've set up everything that needs to be set up in terms of credentials. And this is going to be the sheet that we're using. And you can see that it's the same mock data from earlier in this video series. It's just in a Google Sheet now. So that's what I've done in terms of Google Sheets. And in terms of Airtable, which is going to be our second third-party data, which we're going to demonstrate, I have set up an Airtable and I have set up the Airtable token inside of my secrets manager, and I've already done some basic setup of the backend code that will be needed to fetch data from Airtable. Because this isn't really an Airtable tutorial, this is more about how to use third-party data inside of Wix Tables. And to be honest, I think Google Sheets is quite a unique case in terms of the fact that it's probably very popular. But I really want Airtable to be kind of symbolized, or not really symbolized, but demonstrate a situation where you're fetching data that comes, let's say, in JSON format, basically anything that's not Google Sheets, and that the method of fetching that data and using that specific API that you're using might vary. And I have other tutorials talking about how to fetch third-party data on Wix using their API. So I won't really delve into the Airtable API. I'm just going to kind of take it for granted and maybe show some general principles for how to apply certain concepts. So I'm going to start off with the Google Sheets demonstration. And in order to do this, I've already opened a file here, and I'm just importing the, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see my code. So you can see here that I'm importing the getValues function from the Google Sheets integration, and I have my sheet ID, which I got from my sheet. And again, I'm not delving into this because I also have a tutorial just about Google Sheets integration. So if you haven't seen that yet, you might want to brush up on that before trying to do something like this. So I'm kind of taking for granted that you have a basic idea of how to set up and get started with the Google Sheets. So what I've done here is I've set up this function fetch data, and this is going to be the function that fetches data from Google Sheets for our table. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define this getValues function. And here I have opened the documentation. I don't know if you guys can hear all that honking in the background. Welcome to New York City. Here we have the explanation of how to get data from Google Sheets. And basically, we're using this getValues function. Okay, so I'm going to say right over here, const data. Obviously, I have to spell const right. Const data equals to getValues. And here we need to pass in the sheet ID. So I have that already over here. So that's sheet ID. And this is the range. And this range is the range of cells that we want to get. So for example, if I say, let's say A1 to F3, so that should give us these top three. So let's try that out. So I'm going to go over here and say A1, F3, and I'm just going to go return this data. And I'm going to run this function, fetch data. Go ahead and click run. And we can see that the Google Sheets returned this, which has a lot of information. But inside of this, we have the data, and it has the values, okay, which this is really what we want. So you can see that the first row is the headers, and the second two rows are just the actual rows from, rows 2 and 3 from our Google Sheets. So let's really just extract this values data. Okay, so in order to do that, I am going to go over here to fetch data. Lots of honking going on here. I don't know if you guys can even hear it in the video, but I'm just commenting just in case. Cool, this is the Airtable fetch data, Google Sheets. Okay, so here, what I want to do is I want to extract that second level of data. So I'll do that by kind of extracting that variable. This is a promise. Let's await that. Awesome. And awesome. So we have this data, and then I'm going to say const rows equals to data dot values. And then I'm going to say const header equals to rows 0. And so what I'm going to do here, okay, because I'm kind of planning forward in terms of how we're going to approach this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, whenever we run this fetch data function, I'm actually going to run get values twice, okay? So I'm going to run it once to get the headers, and then I'm going to run it the second time to get whichever rows we want to get. Because if you watch the previous video in this tutorial, we talked a lot about the concept of pagination, which we're going to be using here as well. So in order to prepare for that pagination, I want to always be getting the headers, but not always necessarily the first few rows. And if I skip ahead in the rows, I want to make sure that I'm still always getting the headers. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say const. Let's just. I'm taking a step back here. So we're going to have here A1 to F1, and then I'm going to say const headers equals to data dot values 0. Okay, and there should only be one item in this array, but we only really need that first item. And then I'm going to call this again. Okay, for now, let's just say A3 to F7, just for example. And here we can change this to, let's call this header data. And this we'll call row data. And then this could be header data. And here we can have const rows equals to row data dot values. And then here, when we return, we can return the headers and rows. Okay, so let me just run this in the backend and show you what this looks like now. Awesome, so we have our headers. Okay, so this is an array. Interesting. That's not what I was expecting, to be honest. But we have our rows here, and each row here is an array. Also, yeah, okay, cool. Okay, no, the headers should be an array. I don't know why I thought it wouldn't be an array. Anyways, yeah, so we have one array, which is the headers, and then we have the other arrays, which are rows, I think 3 to 7 or whatever I defined there. Okay, and I just want to change one thing in terms of the fetch data. So what I want to do is I want to make these values here dynamic, which basically means that based on certain parameters that I'm going to pass into this fetch data function, we're going to fetch different rows of the sheet. Okay, so I'm going to have here, let's say, start row and end row. And here, I'm going to change this into a template literal. So this is going to be start row, and this is going to be end row. Awesome. And I don't need $2 there. Great. And now if I run this function one last time, whoops, need a refresh here. That's not going to work. So I'm going to say start row, let's say 5, and end row 18. I'm going to go ahead and run that. And here in terms of rows, so we have 14 rows from row 5 till row 18. Okay, so that's kind of the prep that I'm doing in terms of my Google Sheets, and this should be enough to allow the pagination in the front end. So now let's head to the front end and start setting up the functions and stuff for our table. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to define our data fetching function. Okay, and again, this is something that we talked about in the previous tutorial. So if what I'm saying here is like, what is he talking about? So it might be a good sign to go back and watch that previous video. But just to show you what we're talking about, so here we have this Datafetcher function. And basically this defines what will happen when the table is fetching new data. So that could be either the first time the table loads, it could be when the table has some kind of pagination, and it could be when the table refreshes, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy over this kind of starter code that they have over here, and I'm going to paste it right over here. So this is our row retrieval function, and basically the parameters of start row and end row will be passed in by Wix, and what we need to do is get our data. Okay, so we need to do our data retrieval over here. So in order to do that, I'm going to say import fetch data from backend / Google Sheets, and I'm going to say const data equals await async function, and here we're going to say await. Sorry, this is going to be over here. Await fetch data. I keep saying await, but I don't actually await. And here we're going to have start row and end row. Okay, and this is now maybe you're starting to understand why I decided to set up the backend function the way that I did. Okay, and here, so we got this data, and remember that this data includes both the rows and the headers. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, and this is kind of a level up to what we did in the previous tutorial. So even if you've seen the previous tutorial, this might feel a little new, but we did talk about it. I'm just kind of changing where it happens. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to set the columns of our collection, of our table. So I'm going to say const headers and rows equals to data. Okay, I'm just destructuring that object. And the headers are going to be used for our columns. So I'm going to say const columns are equal to headers dot map. And this is going to be mapped into a column object. Okay, so this is for each header. If we go over here and we go to columns, then you'll be able to refresh yourself what the structure of this column object should look like, which is something like this. I'm just going to copy it over. Whoops. And paste that right over there. This we don't need because it's already an object. Awesome. So in terms of ID, okay, I'm just going to have here everything is going to be header pretty much. Header and header and header. Dun, 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 dun. Header, visible true, type string, link path I'm not including. Okay, so these are our columns, and then we need to assign these columns to our table. So this is table dot columns equals columns. Okay, awesome. So we're done setting up the columns, and what we need to do now is to make some changes to the rows. Okay, because the rows are currently just just an array, but we need to connect between these rows and the headers. And we could have done this in the backend, but I'll do it here in the front end. And basically, we need to create an object for each. Let me see if I can create a full sentence. For each array in the rows, we need to turn that into an object of header row value values. I don't know. Let me show you the take a look here, and you'll see here that the rows, okay, so first name, that's the header, and this is the value. Okay, so currently what we have is we have just the right side. So we have an array where 0 index is John, and then 1 is Doe, and okay, etc. But we need this to be something like this. We need to create an object out of it. Okay, so we'll do this using a for loop. Should we do a for loop or should we do for each? We could do for each. I think that should work. So let's do const. Let's say here, I'm going to say let formatted rows will be equal to an array. And then we can say const rows dot for each. And why is it rows? Rows is declared, but it's never read. Cannot redeclare. Okay. Const. Okay, rows dot for each. And then for each row, what we're going to do is we're going to say formatted rows. Here we also need the index of that row. Formatted rows index. And then we need to choose the appropriate header. So we're going to say headers index. Okay, this is quite complex. I'll explain. If this works, I'll explain. Let's make a deal like that. And then formatted rows index headers index equals to row index. Cool. And then, so this basically formatted our rows if it works, and then I'll explain, but let's assume that it did for now. So then we have our formatted rows, and these formatted rows are what we're going to do here. So I'm going to say if data, then we'll resolve here. The page rows should be rows, and the total row count. So this is something that was a little easier for us to get in terms of our Wix data because we used the query count method, which gave us the amount of rows. When you're using a third party, you'll have to see if that specific API or solution provides a way to query for the full count of how many rows there are in the table. I'm not sure if Google Sheets allows that, and it's slightly outside the scope, I feel, of this tutorial to figure that out for each individual solution. I don't think that it's included in the in this Google Sheets integration in Velo because we only have really these get values, clear values. We're very limited. So to do this, you'd probably need to use the actual Google Sheets API in this case. But you could always just know how many you have. So let's say I know that in this sheet I have 1,000. So I could just hard code that number right over here. Okay, into the total rows count. Not ideal, but possible. Okay, so this I think is good. So here, this row retrieval function, we're going to have to assign that to the table. So table dot Datafetcher equals row retrieval function. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to set up pagination. So I'm going to set up pagination for the table. So table dot pagination. Again, this is something that we showed in the previous tutorial. So the type of the pagination will be pagination. And the other thing, rows per page. Wow, I'm impressed I even remember the first letter of that. Rows per page, let's do 10. Okay, and cool. So let's go into preview mode. And again, going into preview mode, that's your chance to go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel, even if it doesn't work. Okay, cool. Okay. Get values failed. Original error, unable to parse range A0 to F200. Awesome. Okay, so first of all, I mean, there's two things here. One is very clear to me, and the other is not so clear to me. So first of all, the reason it's at A0 is because when Wix, let's go back into the editor. So when Wix defines this start row, end row, so Wix starts the rows from 0, but Google Sheets starts the rows from 1. Okay, so that means that we're always going to need to add 1 to this start row and end row. Okay, so we can do that right over here, +1 and +1. The second thing, which I'm not so clear on, is why it was why the end row was F200 when we defined the pagination like this. I'm going to try defining the pagination before the data fetcher. Okay, let's try that. So I'm going to go ahead back into preview mode now. Again, this is your chance to like the video, to leave a comment. And okay. Cannot set the properties of undefined setting ID. Okay, so this this has to do with the thing I said. Let's see if it works. Oh no, actually this might be the columns. Cannot set the properties of undefined setting ID. Line 28. Let's take a look. Oh yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. So basically, let's take a look again. So formatted rows. Oh, okay, duh. So this formatted rows is currently empty, and I was trying to assign something to it. So, oh shoot. Okay. Um, cool. Okay, so I kind of skipped a logical step here. Because here, this is an array of, this is going to be an array of objects, and a row is an array of arrays. So basically, formatted rows index equals to, we might have to have a for loop within the for loop, which, like within this loop, which is always not a very good thing. Cool. Okay, let's do it like this. So yeah, let's have a for loop here. Let I equal 0. I is smaller than rows index dot length. Why is that not good? Oh, okay. It made me think there was something wrong with the length. And then I plus plus. And here we're going to say let, for each row, 1 second. Here we could just use row.length actually. Row.length, let formatted row be an empty object. And then for each item in the row, we're going to do, we're going to do row, but we're going to do formatted row. And then here we're going to have the headers index. So what I had over here. So headers, and here it's going to be I equals to row I. And then after we have the formatted row, then we're going to say formatted rows index equals to formatted rows. I think this will work. And congrats if you noticed that it wasn't going to work earlier. So let's go into preview mode. Again, this is your chance to comment and like and whatnot. Okay. So, so the columns worked. It's a nice first step. The values don't seem to be working. The pagination is working. Coolish. Okay, so let's add some console logs just to figure out what's going on here. So first of all, right after we fetch the data, let's do console.log data. And then here, after we map our columns, let's do console.log columns. And right here, after we do the rows, no, rows.for each, formatted rows. Oh, here I didn't pass in the formatted rows. That might have been it. So let's just, I'll add the console just in case. So console.log formatted rows, or just do rows, formatted rows. Cool. I really do think it's going to work now. So yeah, let's just check it out. I didn't pass in the, no, oh, I'm so sad. But luckily we have the console logs in there. Okay, so data, so we're getting the headers and we're getting 11 rows, which is technically what I would expect, I guess. Yeah, so that's not very good because we're getting the header inside here. Yeah, so we're gonna have to deal with that, but okay. Anyways, then we have our columns, which are set up like this, so that kind of seems okay. And then here in our rows, circular. Interesting. I have never seen that before, I'll be honest. Circular. Okay. Let me run through the logic here again and see what's going on here. Okay, so we have rows. Let's draw it out. So we have rows, and rows is equal to, it's an array, and it has in it, let me comment this out like this. Okay, so we have rows, and it's an array, and each one of these has an array, and they have kind of the string values. So string, string, awesome. Yeah, and then we have like a bunch of those. Okay, so basically what we want to do is we want to say that for each one of these rows, okay, that's for each. So now we're kind of zoned in on one of these rows. That's this row. And then we want to format it. So we declare the formatted row, which is an object. And the key should be the corresponding header from the corresponding header from our headers. So our headers will also be an array, but each of these strings is the actual key that we want. So it should be formatted rows corresponding header equals to row equals to row I, which should be that string. Okay, so this, I mean, it seems to make sense to me. And then the formatted rows index should be equal to the formatted row, not the formatted rows. And that is the circular that we had there. Cool. And let's go ahead into preview mode. And ta-da! Okay, so here we have our data from our Google Sheets. And now let's see if the pagination works. So if I paginate forward 1, then it fetched more data from the Google Sheets. Okay, just see, so here the last one is Colleen, and then fetch more data. And now the top one is Colleen. Okay, so we need to change a bit of the logic here in terms of what the start row and end row is. So basically we have one problem where we're also getting in the headers as one of the rows. And in order to do that, what we could do is instead of adding 1, we could try adding 2. So like if Wix is saying, okay, the start row should be 0, the start row should actually be 2, okay, not 1. So let's go back into the editor and go to Google Sheets here, and here this should be 2, and also end row plus 2. And that might actually just solve all of our problems. And what I'm going to do also is I'm going to make this just a little bigger so that it's a little easier to see. Go into preview mode. And yeah, so here, great. So now we're not getting the first row. And the last one here is Maribeth. And then we do pagination. And, oh, the top one here is still Maribeth. Um, Let me try and think of why that is happening. Maybe we could do the end row plus 3. How many do we have here? We have from 11. Oh, interesting. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, from 11 to 21. So that's actually more than, no, that's 20. Um, Sorry, that's 10. Uh, Interesting. No, 11 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, it is 11. That's what I thought. It's one of those like math riddles. Okay, so we're getting 11 here. So that means that hmm, hmm. One second. Let me see. This is like I need to break out a paper and pen and start thinking about this. So the start row, this in the beginning, this would be 0 and then 10. In the beginning, this would be 0, 10, and then the next one, it's going to be 11 till 20, and then it should be 21 to 30. Let me just add here console.log start row end row. And then if that's true, then in the back end, what we have for here is 2 and 12. And then here, what we'll have is 13 and 22. But so then there shouldn't be an overlap. Because here where the last one should be 12, and here the last one should be the only way to know is to add console.log. Okay, so I'm going to add console.log here and go into, oh shoot, published, never mind, doesn't matter. Preview. The site's live, you can go check it out. Preview mode. Yeah, so 0 to 10. And then here we do pagination. 10 to 20. Okay, so this is where our problem is coming out. So it does include the last one. So basically, I guess we want to skip forward an extra one in the beginning, starting only in the second. Ugh, this is annoying. Okay. Okay, so here it's 0, and this is 10 to 20, and this is 20, 30, so this is actually going to be 12, which is an overlap with this one. So if we want to avoid that, that means that we're going to have to add one more here, but only if it's not the first one. Because then if we add one more, then I'll start from 3. So if we go to our Google Sheets and we say we can define new variables. We could say const, or I can just put the logic in here actually. So start row equals 0. Then it'll be start row plus 2. And if start row is not equal to 0, then it'll be start row plus 3. Yeah, I mean, look, I might, if this was for production, maybe I would go a little deeper into understanding Google Sheets and the actual Wix and why the logic isn't like lining up 100% in terms of how they handle pagination and row numbering and stuff like that. But this fix should do enough in terms of just kind of making it work. So let's take a look again. So here we have Mary. I'm just taking a look at our Google Sheets and stuff. Yeah, so Mary is the first one. And then here the last one is Maribeth. And then if we go to the next one, then here we have this. Yeah. Okay, so that logic did fix it. Another thing I just thought of is maybe, yeah, another way to do it, possibly, which is a lot simpler, is here in the Google Sheets to fetch always, the start row should always be +2, but the end row should just be +1. That might be where I failed. And then that should also be fetching only 10 and should probably deal with this problem. So Christian and excellent. That was it. I knew there had to be a simple answer and explanation for everything that I was doing wrong. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so that's how to fetch the data from Google Sheets, and this is live. This is live. So if I make a change to this, I go to my Google Sheet and I change Mary's name to Barry, and save to drive. I go to Wix, and now I paginate back to the first page. You'll see the name is Barry. Okay, so obviously they need to paginate to load the new data, so it's not like that fresh. That would be something that you'd have to do with like either a webhook or with a cron job or something, or like an interval of fetching the data. But it's like as soon as somebody does pagination here, it's the live data from your Google Sheet. Okay, so that's how to do Google Sheets. And now we're going to do something very similar to deal with Airtable. So let's go back to the editor. And yeah, so if you're very proud of me that I figured it out, you can go ahead and you can give a like. You could even kind of write a nice comment. I do try to read almost all the comments and respond appropriately when I have some time. Cool. Okay, so we did the Google Sheets, and now we're going to do the Airtable. Okay, so this Airtable is all set up already just to fetch the data. And I'm going to show you what this data looks like. And you'll see here that I've set up two parameters, page size and offset. This is something that's built into the Airtable API. So again, another API might have something a little different in terms of how it's managed. But basically, page size is how big a page should be, and offset is how much you should skip from the beginning. And this is how we're going to handle this instead of end row and start row, because just the way the API works is a little different. And most APIs will probably work in a similar manner to this and not like Google Sheets. So Google Sheets is probably the unique case, whereas most APIs would probably have a method of pagination that's more similar to this. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you. So this is the Google one. We can close that. And let's run the Airtable one. So I set a page size of 10 and an offset of 0. So I'm going to run that. And it's returned with the offset and the records. Okay, and each record here is an object with an ID and with fields. And here you can see that the fields, so this is set up a lot more like a Wix collection if you saw the previous video. So this is going to make dealing with our rows a lot easier, and maybe dealing with our headers, columns a little more complicated, but in general, it shouldn't be too complicated. So let's just talk about how we can kind of make this data a little bit cleaner. So here I'm going to return data.records because I don't really need that other data point from over there. And then in the inside of those records, we have each one has the fields. So what I'm going to do is I can actually make like a map dot map, and then for each record, I'm actually just going to return the record dot fields, because that's really the only thing I need from here. And again, this is very specific to this API. Any other API would be different. Cool. Okay, so now let's go back to our page. And I'm going to switch this. So the function is still fetch data, but instead of from Google Sheets, I'm going to fetch it from our Airtable file. And here, we're going to need to define new logic for fetching the data. So the data that's being fetched is still fetch data, but here instead of start row and end row, we're going to need to put in something a little different. So here we're going to need to put in our page size. So let's define a new variable, const page size. And this is going to be equal to 10. And I'm going to pass it over here, page size, where we define our pagination. And I'm also going to pass it over here in the page fetch data, so page size. And then we need our offset, which in this case is just going to be the start row. Okay, because the start row is where we want to start fetching data. Maybe here we'll also have some kind of weird calculation that I'll need to do in order to make ends meet. But that, like, from a theoretical point of view, it will be start row. Cool, and then we can log our data that we get. And again, this is going to be an array of objects. So now we need to think of how we define our columns. So our columns will be, we can actually just get the first row. So let's get the first row here. So const first row. And this is also very similar to what we did in the previous tutorial, equals to data 0. And then we can say const, let me think about how we did this again. Const columns equals to, let's just do const headers equals to first row, object, it's coming back to me. Object.keys, first row. So basically this takes all of the keys of this object and turns it into an array called headers, and then we can use this map that we already have set up over here. So excellent. Less code that needs to be changed. And then we log the columns. And now for the rows, this is actually going to be really easy because we don't need all of this code over here. Okay, because our rows are already formatted. And this just requires us to pass over here our data, essentially, that we got back, because the data is the rows. Okay, and cool. So I think that that should be enough. So let's go over here and go into preview mode. And again, this is your chance to like the video, to subscribe, to leave a nice little comment. Okay, cool. So we have the data here. You can see here that the first one is Carita. And that is, I'm not sure why that's the first one actually. Maybe it's taking it from the end of the table. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why Airtable decided that's the first record. I do see some kind of something here with the last name. No, I don't know. Um, let's see what happens when we do the pagination. Aha, we have an error. let's see. Cannot read properties map of undefined. Data. Cannot read properties map of undefined in AirTable. Let's take a look. So records was undefined. Cool. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a try catch. And here I'm going to add in, we could just do like this, console.log error. And then, I mean, I could just try and run this using the data that I think it's going to get. So I think it's going to get page size 10 and then offset 10. So let's try running that. Okay, so for some reason that's coming back undefined. This may have something to do with the AirTable API, but let's also console.log response. Uh, 422, unprocessable entity. Okay, let me check out the API for a second. Maybe I misunderstood how offset is supposed to work. Okay, string. Number, string, fetch the next page, include the, oh, interesting. Okay. So, again, this is like quite particular to this API because everyone will handle pagination in a slightly different way. But if you remember, close Google Sheets here. So let me just change it back to, okay, so instead of returning data.records, we're going to return data. And here I'm going to set the offset to 0. I'm going to go ahead and run. So I guess the 0, it just treats it as null. That's why that was working. And here we got back records and offset. So we actually need this offset value. We're going to need that. Okay, so basically we're going to pass all of this in and we'll handle everything on the front end. So here we have data. Let's make our adjustments here. So I'm going to say here, let offset. Okay. And then here, once we get back our data, so I'm going to say offset equals data dot offset. And then here, we're going to need to process this data a little bit. So let's say const formatted data equals to data dot records dot map record dot fields. Okay, so just what I was doing in the back end, just do it in the front end instead. And then that, and then formatted data. Where else do we use the data? Formatted data. If formatted data. Cool. And here, here. So here in the fetch data, instead of passing the start row, we're actually just going to pass the offset. So here, the pagination is kind of working as a hybrid because we're not technically using the start row and end row that we received from Wix. And yeah, so this case, like, who knows, maybe I wouldn't even use the row retrieval function. Maybe I would just set the rows and columns by myself using the rows and columns properties. Because essentially, I guess it's kind of the same. It simplifies it that the callback is called every time the pagination happens. I think it's a nice wrapper. But either way, let's just make sure that this is working. So I'm going to go into preview. Cool. Already working. Invalid offset value. Okay. Yeah, so value, so we'll start off with offset equals null, I guess. No. Let's try that. I might have to deal with it in the back end if this doesn't work. Yeah, okay, that worked. Okay, awesome. So that now we have this. Last one is Jareen, and then pagination, and we have more people. Awesome, Dory and people, and cool. So let's see if I can find Dory here in. Oh, but what if I go back? If I go back, interesting. How do we paginate back? This is a very interesting question. Let's see if there's a skip value here in the Airtable. Sort, filter, cell format, fields, page size. Um, hmm. Cool. So yeah, I didn't think of that. So how to paginate backwards, but it did seem to work. But it's not showing the same values, that's for sure. I go next. Yeah, it's just really kind of random. Um, cool. So I'm actually not going to solve this in the tutorial because it's like this is super particular to this API. I could talk about some general approaches to tackle this, like maybe we can store the different offsets in like an array and then decide which offset to navigate to based on the different pagination and write a formula for that and stuff like that. Yeah, I would really need to like look into the values that are coming back in the offset and stuff like that. So Airtable did not make a very friendly API for this purpose. But this again, this is the live data from the Airtable. So if you make a change in Airtable, it will be reflected here as soon as you load new data into the table. Awesome. Yeah, so I appreciate you watching. I hope this kind of helped in terms of how to fetch third-party data and display it in a table on your Wix website. There's much more to be talked about in this topic and many more ways to improve this process, but I think that this is a good foundation. If you think so too, then go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.